"You really don't have to be involved in everything, Rosalind. Nora and I can handle our own future." He said it lightly, almost like a joke, but there was steel under it. We were standing in the private dining room at the Madison Hotel, the night before my daughter's wedding, the rehearsal dinner. My only child seated at the far end of the table, cheeks flushed with champagne and candles, his hand resting on hers. His parents, his real ones, the couple who'd raised him, weren't there. Only his mother, who sat 3 chairs down from me and watched her son tell me, in front of 40 people, that I needed to stop. Someone laughed, one of Julian's cousins. Nora didn't. She stared down at her napkin. I watched my future son-in-law reach for his glass and clink it with a fork. "Let's all relax," he said, smiling at the room. "Tomorrow's about us. I'm sure Rosalind just wants what's best, in her own way." In her own way. The words landed soft, almost kind, and yet I felt the room shift around me. The small tightening of shoulders, the polite smiles from people who'd known me 6 weeks. I did not snap at him. I smoothed my napkin in my lap, the way my mother used to when she was trying not to cry in public, and said, "You're right, Julian. Tomorrow is about the 2 of you." And I sat through the rest of that dinner without once mentioning the manila folder sitting in my bag, under my chair. They thought that was the end of it. They thought the worst thing that could happen at a rehearsal dinner was a controlling mother of the bride, and that they had successfully managed me into something smaller than a problem. They did not yet know about the file my private investigator had handed me less than a week earlier, the one with Julian's name on it and a marriage certificate from another state. But I'm getting ahead of myself. None of that will mean anything to you unless I tell this in order. Because you can't understand why a woman hires a stranger to look into the man her daughter loves until you know what it feels like to have been wrong about someone once already. My name is Rosalind Cade. I'm 64 years old, and this happened earlier this year. I own 6 strip malls and a self-storage facility in 3 counties, which sounds more glamorous than it is. What it means in practical terms is that for 35 years my late husband and I either answered our phones or we lost tenants. Desmond and I did not start with land. He was the son of a bus driver in Akron, and I was a receptionist in a dentist's office when we met. He used to come in for cleanings every 6 months and leave with pamphlets on flossing he never read. We got married at 26 with $400 in savings and 1 car that shook when you drove it over 40. The first property came 8 years later, a tired, half-empty strip center with a laundromat, a nail salon, and a church that couldn't pay full rent. Desmond saw possibility where most people saw bad parking and flickering neon. He refinanced our house, put every hour he had that wasn't spent at his day job into fixing roofs and repainting facades, and 6 years after that he knew the name of every tenant by first name and their kids' birthdays by heart. We didn't flip properties. We held them. Added one, then another, then another. A little self-storage place near the interstate that everyone told us was a terrible idea. People don't store that much junk, became the single most reliable stream of income we had. By the time Desmond turned 60, Cade Properties owned 8 parcels. We never once bought a boat. We drove the same Toyota for 11 years. The joke in our family was that my husband liked concrete and leases more than vacations. We had 1 child, a daughter, Nora. She grew up playing hide-and-seek behind roll-up storage doors and doing homework at the small folding table in the leasing office after school. When she was little, she used to draw floor plans in the margins of her spelling tests. At 12, she informed us she was going to be an architect. Desmond put his fork down that night and said, simply, "Good. Somebody's got to design the places we rent." He meant it. He believed in her. I did too. I just believed in her differently. That's the part I have to be honest about. When Nora was 22, fresh out of architecture school and still wearing the kind of boots that destroyed your knees, she fell in love with a drummer. His name was Levi. He had the kind of face people write songs about and the kind of job history that makes parents reach for their checkbooks. They were in love for almost a year. He wanted to start a small music venue in an old warehouse downtown, and I saw in his glossy-eyed enthusiasm every failed tenant we had ever gently pushed out of one of our spaces. I told her he was unstable. I told her she'd end up supporting him. I told her, in a moment I regret more than anything else I'm going to tell you, you can't build a life on someone who can't pay rent on time. She moved out of our house that night. They broke up 3 months later for reasons that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the 1,000 ordinary fissures that open between 2 people in their 20s. She never once said I was right. What she said a year later when she finally came home for dinner was quieter and worse. "You made it impossible to come to you when it started going wrong," she told me, hands folded around a glass of water. "Because I didn't want it to mean you'd won. We have never fully patched that fracture. We learned how to walk around it." She built her own career, junior architect, then associate, then lead on mid-sized projects. She rented her own apartment, paid every bill herself, and when Desmond died 3 years ago of a heart attack in the parking lot of our first strip mall, she sat on my couch and held my hand and talked for 2 hours straight about anything except what I was going to do with the properties. Desmond left everything to me outright. Not because he didn't trust her, because he'd seen enough families torn apart by forcing the next generation into ownership before they knew whether they wanted it. His will and the operating agreements on each LLC said the same thing. Rosalind Cade, sole managing member. Nora would inherit in time, through a trust, but there would be a period where the responsibility would be mine alone. "It's not just money, Roz," he'd said when we signed those papers. "These places are leverage. In the right hands, they keep you safe. In the wrong hands." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We'd both seen what could happen when someone married into property they didn't understand and thought square footage meant free spending, not maintenance and loans and insurance and payroll. When Julian showed up, 3 years after Desmond died, I was not thinking about leverage. I was thinking about how beautiful my daughter looked in that blue dress she wore to the firm's holiday party, and how I had not seen her this light on her feet in a decade. They met, like so many people do now, at a charity gala. She told me about him over the phone first. "He's in commercial lending," she said. "Knows a lot about small business financing. You'd like him." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. The first time he came to my house, he brought a very good bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers that were slightly too expensive for the occasion. He was charming in a way that felt practiced but not yet weaponized. I told myself I was being uncharitable. People are allowed to be polished. He looked around my kitchen, at the framed photo of Desmond on the counter holding a set of keys in front of one of our centers, at the paperwork stacked neatly near the fridge that I'd forgotten to move. "Cade Properties," he said with an appreciative whistle. "I've driven past a few of those. You own those personally?" The way he asked it, casual, like asking whether a casserole was homemade or store-bought, put a small cold stone in my stomach. "Desmond and I did," I said. "I manage them now." He nodded, filed that away, and asked a follow-up question not about my husband or how long we'd been married, but about loan terms on commercial refis. That was the first time my gut tugged at me. Not a scream, just a quiet, persistent tap on the inside of my ribs. I ignored it. It would not be the last time. The first 4 dinners were harmless, or they looked that way, which is its own kind of lesson. Nora brought him over on a Sunday, then a Thursday, then a quick Tuesday takeout because we were in the neighborhood. He helped clear plates, remembered my tenants' names after hearing them once, called me Roz on the 3rd visit, which nearly made me drop a plate. "My friends call me Roz," I said, sharper than I meant to. "You're not my friend," he said, smiling. "You're family, or you will be." It was meant to be charming. Nora glowed. I let it pass. Looking back, I can see now that those early dinners were doing something quieter than charm. They were laying track. Every visit, a small question about the properties, framed as interest, as concern, as a man in commercial lending simply making conversation. "Do you ever worry about succession planning?" he asked once, over coffee, while Nora was upstairs grabbing a cardigan. "I see it all the time. Owner gets older. Something unexpected happens. Properties get tied up in probate." It was, on its face, a fair question. It was the word older that pricked, like it was a thing that had already happened to me. A few weeks later, at his apartment, he brought up Nora's student loans while she hummed to herself doing dishes in the next room. "Sometimes families help," he said, "especially when there's legacy wealth." His eyes didn't quite meet mine when he said it, like he'd rehearsed the phrase in a mirror. Small stones, one dinner at a time, collecting in my stomach. I told myself I was being an overprotective widow. I told myself Desmond used to talk shop with strangers at barbecues too. I told myself a lot of things that week. The 3rd time, he went for the properties directly, and that's the conversation I remember in full, because it's the one where I stopped being able to talk myself out of what I was feeling. It was a Sunday brunch, my turn to host. Nora was running late from a site visit. Julian arrived first, with pastries from an expensive bakery and a bouquet of tulips that clashed perfectly with my tablecloth. He wandered to the window where you can see the corner of one of my strip centers if you lean just right. "You know I've done some of the lending on centers about that size," he said, "not yours. Obviously, conflict of interest and all that." I hadn't asked. He turned back to me, leaning against the windowsill. "Can I ask you something, Rosalind, off the record?" "Depends what it is," I said. He laughed. "Fair enough. I'm just curious. With what those centers are worth now, and I have a ballpark in my head. Trust me. How do you think about legacy? Do you see yourself holding them until you're gone? Selling and simplifying? Passing them to Nora in pieces?" I took a breath, counted to 3, and reminded myself that some people are simply fascinated by real estate. "We hold," I said. Desmond believed in holding. He used to say the concrete paid the bills long after the purchase price was a memory. "And you don't worry about managing them as you get older?" Julian asked. "It's a lot. Tenants, repairs, insurance. I've seen it burn people out." "I'm not porcelain," I said, more sharply than I meant to. He blinked, held up his hands. "Didn't mean it like that," he said. I look at Nora. She's working 60-hour weeks. She wants kids one day. It would be nice for her if some of that weight wasn't hanging over you when that time comes." The words were all reasonable. The picture underneath them was not. A future where my land, my leverage were already quietly filed under Julian and Nora's plans. They had been dating 4 months. Nora came through the door moments later, cheeks pink from the cold, and kissed him before she kissed me. "We were just talking about your mother's empire," he said, arm around her. She groaned. "Stop trying to talk shop on Sundays. You'll scare her off dinner invites." He grinned, and the tension evaporated from the room, for them at least. I set plates on the table and listened to them talk about floor plans and interest rates, about a trip they wanted to take next spring, and I thought about a drummer named Levi, and the way I had once tried to crush a future because I didn't like the instrument it came wrapped in. After they left, I washed dishes alone and stood at the sink for a long time, hands in warm water gone lukewarm, looking out at the corner of the strip center we'd mortgaged our first house to buy. My gut was not screaming, it was whispering, a thread of unease I could have easily written off as overprotective widowhood. Desmond's voice came back to me from years earlier, from a different conversation entirely, a prospective tenant who'd seemed too eager to sign a long lease. "Your gut is just your brain adding up details faster than you can name them," he'd said. "If it's uneasy, there's a reason. You just might not have the paperwork yet." I dried my hands. I turned off the light. And for the first time since Julian had walked into my house with that very good bottle of wine, I let myself ask a question I'd been avoiding. If there was something I didn't know about him, would I rather find out before my daughter married him, or after? It would be another few weeks before I answered it out loud to a stranger in a small office with blinds half drawn. But that afternoon, standing in my kitchen, was the first time I admitted to myself that I might need help finding the paperwork. The proposal came sooner than I expected, and exactly when, statistically, it made sense. They'd been together 5 months when Nora called me on a Tuesday afternoon between meetings. I remember because I was in the back office of the self-storage facility arguing with a roofing contractor about a leak that somehow only appeared when it rained sideways. "Mom," she said, breathless, "do you have a minute?" I stepped outside into the strip of sun between units, where you can smell hot asphalt and detergent from the coin-op machines. "For you? Always." There was a pause, the kind where you can hear someone smiling. "Julian asked me to marry him," she said. "Last night I said yes." People talk about their hearts stopping. Mine didn't. It did something slower and stranger, like someone had put a hand on it and pressed down gently, just enough to make it hard to take a full breath. "That's big news," I said. "Congratulations, honey." "He did it by the fountain at the Arboretum," she said, words tumbling over each other now. With those awful violins they play over the speakers. It was so cheesy and perfect. I wanted to tell you in person, but he was so excited. I leaned against the warm metal door of Unit 14B and closed my eyes. "I'm happy you're happy," I said, because it was true and not the whole truth. "We're thinking spring," she went on. "There's this venue upstate we've been eyeing. It books out far, but Julian has a connection through one of his clients." "How far out?" I asked. "A beat." "Well, that's the other thing. They had a cancellation for 8 weeks from now." We put a soft hold on it. I know it's fast, but when you know, I finished for her, because I'd heard that sentence before from my 22-year-old self, and from every other person who has ever tried to outrun a sinking feeling with momentum. It's not just that, Nora said quickly. His schedule's insane in the second half of the year, and my firm has 2 big projects breaking ground this summer. Spring is the only window where we can actually take a honeymoon. And, she hesitated, and I'm 34. I don't want to wait another 3 years to start a family. There it was. The gun to her own head, held by biology and decades of cultural narratives and, if I'm being honest, 1,000 tiny comments I'd made over the years about wanting grandchildren while I still remembered where I put my glasses. I understand, I said, because I did. Can we at least sit down and talk through what that timeline actually looks like? Venue as guests? Costs? We're not asking you to pay for everything, Mom, she said, anticipating an argument I hadn't made. Julian and I have savings. His parents want to contribute. We'd love your help with some parts if you're willing. If I'd been waiting for her to ask me for money, this was not the way I'd hoped it would come, bundled with a compressed timeline and a man I still wasn't sure I knew in ways that mattered. We'll figure it out, I said. Come over Sunday, bring Julian, we'll put a pot of coffee on and make a list. The conversation ended with more laughter, more plans. I went back inside and told the roofing contractor to schedule the repair. It felt good to give someone a clear yes. That Sunday, my dining table turned into a war room. Nora arrived with a binder. Julian arrived with a spreadsheet. I put out fruit and muffins and 3 kinds of jam, because feeding people is what you do when you don't know how else to help. They spread their papers out, crossing things off, circling others, the way excited couples do. It's not going to be huge, Nora said. Maybe 80-90 guests, mostly family. Some of my colleagues, a couple of his. I flipped through the binder. Venue photos, rustic wooden beams and fairy lights. A 5-tier cake that looked like it belonged in a magazine. A dress circled in the corner, with a price tag that made my eyebrows climb. We've priced most of it out, Julian said, sliding his laptop around so it faced me. Here. Venue, catering, band, photographer. We're talking about somewhere in the 60 to 70 range, all in. We've already put down a deposit for the venue out of our savings. I looked at the number at the bottom of the column. Just under $65,000. When your father and I got married, I said before I could stop myself, we had 2 sheet cakes from the grocery store and your Aunt Lynn's church pianist. Nora met my eyes. It's a different time, she said, not unkindly. And we're not asking for a fairy tale castle. This is actually mid-range for that venue. Julian jumped in smoothly. We're contributing too, of course. I've already put aside 15. Nora has 10. My parents can do another 10 to 15. We were wondering if you might be able to help with 20 out of a savings cushion and portfolio that could have paid for 5 weddings without making a dent. I thought of Bridget, the woman in my widow's group who'd nearly bankrupted herself paying for her son's destination wedding because she was afraid of looking stingy in front of her in-laws. I'm not Bridget, I thought. I can do 20, I said. That's my number. Nora's shoulders dropped an inch in relief. Julian's smile faltered just a fraction. I was hoping, he said, choosing his words carefully, we might be able to get closer to half. Weddings are once in a lifetime. And given your situation. My situation, I repeated. He flushed. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, your father was very successful. You shouldn't have to worry about money. This is the kind of thing legacy wealth is for. There it was again. Legacy wealth, like a character at the table none of us had invited. My father was successful, Nora said, sharper than I'd heard her in months. Mom is the one who deals with the realities of that every day. It's her call. He looked between us, recalibrating. Of course, he said. I didn't intend to step on any toes. 20 is generous. We'll make it work. The rest of the planning session was cordial and strained. They left after 2 hours with a revised spreadsheet and a promise to send me vendor contracts to review if I had time. I transferred the $20,000 to Nora's account that evening and tried not to think about the line item labeled miscellaneous that had somehow grown in their budget. In the weeks that followed, my role in the planning became largely ceremonial. Nora texted me photos of dress fittings and table settings. Amelia, the coordinator at the venue, CC'd me on a few emails about headcounts and dietary restrictions. Julian called once to ask if he could list me as the emergency contact for a rental car for their honeymoon. I said yes to everything that seemed harmless and bit my tongue on the rest. It wasn't until 2 weeks before the wedding that the quiet stone in my stomach turned into something heavier. I was at Nora and Julian's apartment dropping off a box of old family photos she'd asked for. The door was unlocked. She'd texted to say she was running late from a site visit and to let myself in. I stepped into the living room, set the box on the coffee table, and heard his voice from the bedroom down the hall. "Of course there's money," he was saying. "Her mother owns half the county and strip malls. She's just old school about it. Wants to protect Nora. We'll get there." There was a pause. A muffled voice I couldn't quite make out. "No, this isn't like last time," Julian said, sharper now. "I've learned. There won't be any joint accounts until we've got clearer sightlines. But I'm not walking away from another situation where I'm the one bringing all the effort, and someone else sits on millions out of principle." My hand tightened on the strap of my purse. Last time, I should have walked away. I should have made noise, announced myself, given him the dignity of knowing he was being overheard. Instead, I did what women of my generation have been trained to do in rooms where money and men are talking. I froze. I listened. "I'm not saying she's a bad person," he went on. "I'm saying she's exactly the kind of person who would let her kid drown in debt rather than spoil them. That kind of thinking is how wealth dies. I'm not going to let that happen again." Again, the muffled voice said something else. Julian laughed, short and humorless. "Yeah," he said. "This time I'm making sure the paperwork's in place before anything gets messy. I'm not leaving a marriage empty-handed twice." The sound of a drawer closing. Footsteps. I moved without thinking, easing back toward the door like a teenager sneaking out of a movie. My heart was doing something unpleasant in my chest. My hands felt cold. I let myself out, quietly, closed the door behind me, and made it all the way to the elevator before my knees started to shake. Last time. Empty-handed twice. Paperwork. I sat in my car for 10 minutes in the parking lot, hands on the steering wheel, breath coming in short little bursts, and I heard Desmond's voice again. "Your gut is just your brain adding up details faster than you can name them." I didn't have names yet. Last time, another situation. But I had enough to know that whatever Julian had been through before, my daughter did not know the whole story. For the first time in my life, I called a private investigator. I didn't know yet that the file waiting for me would carry another woman's name before it ever carried Julian's. Her name was Marta Klein, and she looked nothing like I expected a private investigator to look. No trench coat, no cigarette, no dramatic hat. Just a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, a navy blazer, and a legal pad so worn at the edges it had probably been through more divorces than most family law attorneys. Her office was on the second floor of a low brick building sandwiched between a tax preparer and a nail salon. The sign on the door said Klein Investigative Services in peeling gold letters. The blinds were half drawn. I sat in the chair opposite her desk and folded my hands in my lap, the way I had at the rehearsal dinner, the way I had at every meeting where I wasn't sure yet who I was going to be. "You're the one who called about the prospective son-in-law," she said, glancing at her notes. "Yes," I said. "Rosalind. My daughter's name is Nora." "Fiancé's name?" she asked, pen poised. "Julian Parks," I said. "Early 30s. Works in commercial lending. At least that part checks out." I told her everything I could remember. The first dinner, the questions about succession, the student loans, the negotiations over the wedding, the conversation I'd just overheard in the apartment last time, empty-handed twice. Paperwork. I heard how it sounded as I said it out loud. A mother with too much money and too little trust, sitting in a PI's office complaining about a young man who might just be insecure about finances. Marta wrote as I spoke, her pen moving in small, precise strokes. When I finished, she looked up. "What are you hoping I'll find?" she asked. It was a disarming question. Not "what are you afraid of?" Not "what do you think is there?" What did I want? "I don't know," I said honestly. "Either nothing, so I can feel like an overly suspicious old woman, or enough that I can justify asking my daughter to call off a wedding 8 weeks out." She nodded. "We don't promise outcomes," she said. "We promise information. I can tell you what's on paper. Court records, marriages, divorces, bankruptcies, liens, judgments, employment history, to the extent it shows up, social media scraping. I cannot tell you whether he loves your daughter." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "If the paper is bad enough, the rest won't matter." Maybe, she said. Sometimes people stay anyway, even with the paper in front of them. That's not my part. My part is the paper. She slid a form across the desk. I'll need a retainer. And his full legal name, date of birth, any previous addresses you know. The states he's mentioned living in. Nora said he lived in Phoenix for a year after college, I said. Before he came back here. Marta's pen paused for just a second. Phoenix, she repeated. All right. I wrote a check. It felt, perversely, like paying a bill for a tenant improvement, the same mixture of dread and relief. Something was being done. It might be painful. It might save a building. How long will this take? I asked. A week, she said. Maybe less, depending on how messy his paper trail is. I'll call you, and then we'll go from there. I walked out of that office with a business card in my pocket and a new kind of guilt in my stomach. I had hired someone to investigate the man my daughter loved without telling her. I told myself it was because I didn't want to accuse him without facts. I told myself it was because if I was wrong, I'd rather be wrong in private. The truth was simpler and uglier. I didn't want to watch her choose him knowing what I knew. The week that followed was one of the strangest of my life. On the surface, everything moved forward. Invitations went out. Nora texted me a photo of a florist's mock-up and asked, "Too much eucalyptus?" Julian stopped by my office one afternoon with coffee just because, and asked if I'd considered selling the self-storage facility while the market was hot. Underneath, I was waiting for the phone to ring. When it did, I almost dropped it. "Rosalind, it's Marta." Her voice was as calm as it had been in person. Mine wasn't. "What did you find?" I asked, skipping hello. "A few things," she said. "I'd rather go over them in person." "Are you available this afternoon?" I canceled a meeting with a tenant and drove to her office. The folder on her desk was thin, which I found briefly reassuring until I remembered that sometimes it doesn't take much paper to ruin a life. She walked me through it methodically. Traffic tickets. Nothing alarming. A small claims court judgment from years ago over an unpaid security deposit, which she waved off as annoying, but not a pattern. No criminal charges, no obvious substance issues. And then this, she said, sliding a photocopy across the desk. At the top, in neat black letters, Superior Court of Maricopa County, State of Arizona. Below that, Petition for annulment of marriage. The names blurred for a moment, as if my eyes were trying to protect me. Then they snapped into focus. Petitioner, Emma L. Carter. Respondent, Julian M. Parks. Annulment, I said, hearing my voice from a distance. Not divorce. Annulment, Marta confirmed. 4 years ago. Married 8 months. No children. The grounds listed are fraud and misrepresentation regarding financial obligations and intent to support. She tapped the page with one finger. Now, judges don't grant annulments easily on those grounds without some substance. I pulled the supporting documents. "Do you want to see them?" I nodded. My hands shook when I took the pages. There were affidavits, one from Emma, one from a friend. Bank statements showing joint accounts opened, credit cards taken out. A line describing withdrawals from her accounts to pay off his pre-existing debts he'd never disclosed. Emails where he promised to take care of everything once the promotion comes through. They annulled it after extensive mediation, Marta said. No criminal charges. The judgment notes that both parties agreed to rescind the marriage as if it never happened, with certain financial concessions on his part. As if it never happened, I repeated, staring at his name on the paper. So he can say he's never been married. Legally, she said, it's as if he hasn't. Practically, he has done this once before. I flipped to the last page. The date of the decree. The judge's signature. This is public record? I asked. Buried, she said. But public. Different state, which is probably why your daughter didn't stumble on it in a casual search. I had to go looking. I thought of the way he'd said again. I'm not leaving a marriage empty-handed twice. There's more, Marta said gently. This isn't technically part of the legal file, but I thought it was relevant. She handed me a printout of a social media post. A woman in her late 20s, smiling tightly at the camera, a caption underneath. PSA, if your fiancé insists on rushing the wedding and refuses to talk prenup because love doesn't need contracts, please, for the love of your future, do a background check. Some of us had to learn the hard way that not all husbands are honest about their debts. The comments were mostly sympathetic. One caught my eye, a friend asking if she meant Jay. Emma had replied with a single bitter line. Let's just say some men marry women, and some men marry balance sheets. My stomach turned. I put the papers down. So, Marta said quietly, now you have the paperwork. What you do with it is up to you. I sat there in that little office above the nail salon and felt 3 different kinds of grief at once. One for my daughter, who had no idea she was about to marry a man whose last attempt at partnership ended in a court document using the word fraud. One for the life I had almost had with a son-in-law I could trust, the version of Julian that existed only in the hopeful corners of my mind. And one, unexpectedly, for Emma in Arizona, who had once stood on the other end of a phone line like this, reading her own name on this very form. What would you do, I asked Marta, if it were your daughter? She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was with the same practical tone she'd used all along. I'd tell her the truth, she said, and I'd do it before she signed anything binding. People have a right to make their own mistakes, but they should at least know what they're choosing. I drove home with the file on the passenger seat, the way you'd drive with something fragile riding beside you, not fast, not slow, just careful. At every red light, my hand found its way to the manila cover, as if checking that it hadn't all evaporated. At home, I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. I thought about Levi and the warehouse and the way I had once bulldozed my daughter's love with I know better. I thought about Desmond and his talk of leverage, of how concrete and paper can keep you safe if you're willing to use them. Most of all, I thought about the look on Nora's face at the rehearsal dinner when Julian told a room full of people I didn't need to be involved in everything. There is a difference between controlling someone and refusing to let them walk into oncoming traffic when you can see the truck. When Nora called that night to ask if I could come to the rehearsal dinner at the Madison Hotel the following week, I said yes. I did not tell her about the file. Not yet. If the truth was going to blow up her life, it was going to happen in a room where everyone who needed to see it was already seated at the table. You hear stories about people hiring investigators before weddings the way you hear stories about plane crashes. Distant, dramatic, something that happens to other families in articles you half read and set aside. It's different when the report is on your own kitchen table with your daughter's fiancé's name at the top. I didn't sleep much the night after Marta handed me the file. I made tea I didn't drink. I paced between the stove and the sink until the grout pattern on the tile felt burned into my retinas. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that line on the annulment decree, fraud and misrepresentation regarding financial obligations and intent to support. Some part of me wanted to march straight to Nora's apartment, pound on the door, shove the papers into her hands and say, look at who you are about to marry. Another part remembered Levi, and how being right had felt exactly like being alone. In the morning, I did the least dramatic thing available. I called my lawyer. Linda Fowler had been our estate attorney for years. She was the one who'd drawn up the operating agreements for the LLCs, the trusts, the will. When Desmond died, she'd guided me through the paperwork, gently but firmly, like a nurse changing a bandage that needed to come off, whether you were ready or not. Rosalind, she said, when I walked into her office that afternoon, you look like you've been up all night. I have, I said, and I brought homework. I laid Marta's folder on her desk and talked until my throat felt raw. The dinners, the questions about money, the conversation in the apartment, the Arizona marriage. Linda read in silence, her glasses low on her nose. Every now and then she made a small sound that might have been a hum or a suppressed curse. When she finished, she took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Well, she said, he's certainly efficient. That's one word for it, I said. She looked up at me. What do you want to do? There it was again, that question. What did I want? Not what did I think was fair or kind or dignified. What outcome in a world where nothing was clean did I actually want to steer toward? I want my daughter not to marry a man who sees marriage as a leverage strategy, I said. I want him nowhere near my properties, and I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror in 10 years and not wonder if I failed her by staying quiet. Linda nodded once. All right, she said. So we separate this into 2 tracks. 1, protecting your assets regardless of whether this wedding goes forward. 2, how, when, and whether to share this information with Nora. Can he get at anything now? I asked. If they marry? Directly? No, she said. All the properties are in LLCs with you as sole managing member. Your living trust names Nora as eventual beneficiary, but nothing transfers automatically at your death without going through that structure. A spouse's claim would be limited to whatever she actually owns at the time, and potentially appreciation if she commingles inheritance with marital funds later. In English, I said. In English, she repeated, he can't touch a square inch of concrete unless you die. She inherits, and then she mixes that inheritance into joint accounts or uses it to buy jointly titled property. What we can do is tighten the language now, so that when that day comes, hopefully many years from now, it's harder for a spouse to make a case. We spent an hour doing exactly that. We added provisions to Nora's future interest trust, specifying that any distributions would be to her separate property only, not to joint accounts. We clarified that the LLC interests would pass into a spendthrift trust with protections against creditors and ex-spouses. We updated my will to reflect changes in tax law and, more quietly, my changing understanding of risk. It was unglamorous work. No gavel bangs, no triumphant declarations, just signatures on paper that would quietly stand between my husband's life's work and someone else's plans. And the other track? I asked when we were done, telling Nora. Linda leaned back in her chair. You have a few options, she said. You can tell her privately and let her decide what to do in her own time. You can tell her and insist, as her mother, that she postpone or cancel, or she tapped the file. You can choose a moment where the reality of who he is has to stand in front of people who've believed another story. You mean blow it up in public, I said. I mean, she said carefully, present facts in a setting where he cannot spin them away without witnesses. That doesn't have to mean screaming at a rehearsal dinner. It could be a smaller meeting, just the four of you, or her plus a friend she trusts. I thought about Nora, the way she'd sat at my own kitchen table years ago and told me I'd made it impossible to come to me when things started going wrong because she didn't want me to think I'd won. If I tell her alone, I said slowly, there is a non-zero chance she'll go straight to him. He'll spin it as me trying to control her again. She'll dig in, because that's what people do when they feel cornered. And then he will walk her down the aisle with this in his pocket. And if you do it with witnesses? Linda asked. He doesn't get to rewrite it as your mother's crazy vendetta, I said. There are other people in the room who saw the paper. People who might say, later, no, Nora, we saw it too. Linda nodded. Exactly. It'll humiliate her, I said, in front of whoever's there. Possibly, she said. It will definitely humiliate him. The question is whether you think the cost of that moment is worth not letting this stay in the dark. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the air conditioner filling the space where an easier answer might have gone. When is the rehearsal dinner? She asked. Next Thursday, I said. At the Madison Hotel. Private room. Both families. Some of their friends. Will his parents be there? She asked. Yes, I said. They're flying in on Wednesday. And do you have the sense they know any of this? She tapped the Arizona decree. I thought of Julian's mother on the one Zoom call I'd sat in on, smiling, careful, a little too quick to compliment me on my restraint about the wedding budget. I don't know, I said. But if they do, they've taught him very well how to pretend it never happened. Linda sighed. Here is my recommendation, as your lawyer, she said. You invite me to the rehearsal dinner as your guest. I'll sit quietly, eat my chicken, and keep my folder under my chair. At some point before dessert, you ask for a few minutes as the bride's mother. You say what you need to say. I produce the documents if he denies. No histrionics, just facts. And as my friend? I asked. As your friend, she said, I think you should also talk to Nora alone beforehand, in some way. Even if it's just to say, there's something coming you're not going to like, and I'm doing it because I'd rather you hate me for telling the truth than love me for staying quiet. I laughed weakly. That's a terrible Hallmark card. It is, she said, and also not far from the job description of being a parent sometimes. On the drive home, the plan felt both too much and not enough. I was going to walk into a room full of people with a manila folder and tip over my daughter's life in front of them. I was also going to protect her from the kind of long, grinding financial abuse another woman in another state had fought her way out of, at enormous cost. That night I called Nora. She sounded tired and happy, the way people do when they are standing in the middle of a house made of plans. How's the menu tasting shaping up? I asked. It's going to be great, she said. Julian's excited about the steak option. I'm excited about the cake. You're excited about what? The chairs? I'm excited about the part where you don't starve your guests, I said. Listen, honey, there's something we need to talk about before Thursday. There was a pause. Is this about the budget? She asked, cautious now. Because we really are keeping it under control. It's not about the budget, I said. It's bigger than that. I can't explain it in 2 minutes over the phone, but I want you to know that if Thursday gets complicated, it's because I've learned something important, and I couldn't live with myself if I pretended I hadn't. You don't have to trust my choices. I just need you to know I'm not doing it to win anything. She was quiet long enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Are you planning to make a scene at my rehearsal dinner? She asked finally. No, I said. I'm planning to tell the truth. Whether that feels like a scene might depend on how many lies have been told before we get there. That's ominous, she said. I know, I said softly. I'm sorry. I'll see you Thursday. I hung up and put the phone face down on the table next to Marta's folder. There are moments, I've learned, where you step into a version of yourself you have been resisting for years, not because you like her, but because she has been waiting to do the thing no one else will. At 64 years old, on a random Monday night, I realized I had finally become the woman my daughter had always accused me of being. Not controlling, responsible. The Madison Hotel had done its best to make the private dining room feel like a fairy tale. White tablecloths, flickering candles in glass cylinders, little gold place cards with names engraved in looping script. Someone had strung soft lights along the ceiling beams, so the whole room glowed the way you imagine happiness looks in magazines. I stood in the doorway for a moment, folder under my arm, and watched my daughter laugh at something Julian whispered into her ear. She looked every bit the bride-to-be, radiant, nervous, lit from the inside by a story she thought she knew the ending of. Linda arrived a few minutes after I did, in a dark green dress that made her look less like an attorney, and more like someone's very poised aunt. She gave me a small nod when she walked in, then took her seat 2 chairs down from me on the same side of the table. Last chance to back out, she murmured while she unfolded her napkin. We can stick this back in the drawer and let life do what it's going to do. I looked at Nora, at the way her hand rested on Julian's forearm, at the hopeful exhaustion on Julian's parents' faces. They were in from out of state, already slightly overwhelmed by the hotel and the menu and the idea of their son marrying into what they clearly perceived as money. If I back out, I said quietly, I become part of the lie. Linda nodded once. Then we wait for the right beat. She said, no rush. Pick a moment when no one has a mouthful of steak. Dinner unfolded in courses. Salads gave way to entrees. The conversation ebbed and flowed. Toasts began. Julian's father stood first, told a story about his son breaking his arm, falling out of a tree at 8 and insisting on climbing back up as soon as the cast was on. Nora's boss followed, talking about her work ethic and how she'd once slept in the firm's conference room to meet a deadline. I listened. I smiled. I pressed my fingers occasionally against the edge of the folder resting on my lap under the tablecloth. Halfway through dessert, a trio of tiny tarts that tasted like sugar and lemon, and regret, I tapped my water glass with the back of my fork. The room settled. Not silent exactly, but expectant. I'd like to say a few words, I said. Someone murmured, of course. All eyes came to me. Nora's bright and slightly glassy. Julian's steady. I'll keep it brief, I said. Most of you know me as Nora's mother, and as Desmond's widow. Some of you, I nodded toward Julian's parents, have only met me once or twice, and mostly through the lens of wedding spreadsheets. A small ripple of laughter. Good. Let them exhale before I took the air out of the room. I want to say first that I am very happy my daughter has found someone who makes her laugh the way she's been laughing tonight, I said, and that part was not a performance. She deserves joy. Desmond would be unbearable with pride if he were here. My voice caught for just a moment on his name. I let it. The truth needed to come wrapped in all of it, not just the convenient parts. And, I said, because I am her mother, and because I loved her father, I have duties that are not always festive. One of them is to pay attention when something feels off. Another is to act on it, even when that makes me unpopular. The room shifted. You could feel people straighten slightly, like animals catching a change in the wind. Nora, I said, turning to her, I want to say this in front of you, and in front of the people who love you, because I don't ever want you to think I went behind your back. A few weeks ago, after a conversation I overheard by accident, I hired someone to look into Julian's past. The silence after that sentence wasn't just quiet, it was vacuum. Somewhere down the table, a fork stopped, mid-air, halfway to a mouth that never closed around it. A candle flame bent sideways in a draft nobody else seemed to feel. Julian's mother's hand, still holding her water glass, went white at the knuckles before she even understood why. Nora blinked. "You, what?" Julian's jaw tightened just enough that I saw it, though I doubt anyone at the far end of the table did. "I hired a licensed private investigator," I said, "to run a premarital background check. It's an actual service. People use it when they're about to trust someone with their life and their finances." I could feel Julian's parents watching me now, their politeness straining. "That is wildly inappropriate," Julian said, his voice calm in the way people's voices get right before they break. "If you had concerns, you could have come to me." "I didn't want explanations," I said. "I wanted facts." I reached under the table, lifted the folder onto the white tablecloth, and slid it halfway between us. "This is what she found," I said. For a second, no one moved. Then Linda cleared her throat gently. "Perhaps," she said, "we could take a moment in the lounge next door?" Just immediate family. This kind of conversation seldom benefits from an audience of 40. I could have kissed her. Nora looked around the table at her friends, at her future in-laws, at the shimmering dessert plates. Her face had gone pale. "Everyone, I'm sorry," she said. "Can you give us a few minutes?" Chairs scraped back. People began talking in low, confused murmurs. Julian's parents stood automatically when he did. Linda gathered the folder. The hotel coordinator appeared as if summoned, and Linda asked her quietly to show us to a smaller room. We ended up in a side lounge, the kind of place executives use for breakout sessions. A small couch, 2 armchairs, a low table, no candles, no audience. Julian remained standing. Nora sat on the edge of the couch, hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. His parents took the armchairs, stiff as if bracing for impact. Linda set the folder on the table and opened it. "Before anyone says anything else," she said, "I'd like to be very clear about what this is and what it is not. This is a packet of public records and supporting documents obtained legally from court archives in another state. It concerns a prior legal proceeding involving Julian, specifically an annulment petition filed 4 years ago in Maricopa County, Arizona." Julian's mother made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a protest. His father put a hand on her knee. Nora turned her head slowly, looking at Julian. "Is that true?" she asked. "You were married?" He exhaled through his nose. "Briefly," he said. "It meant nothing. I didn't tell you because it was legally annulled. It's as if it never happened." "In the eyes of the law," Linda said mildly, "perhaps. In the eyes of the person who had to file a petition citing fraud and misrepresentation regarding financial obligations, I suspect it felt somewhat more substantial." He rounded on her. "Who are you?" "My attorney," I said, "and the person keeping this from turning into a shouting match." Julian looked back at Nora. "She's twisting it," he said. "It was a mistake. We rushed into things. Her family hated me. They used money as a weapon. I didn't tell you because I didn't want them to poison how you see us the way they tried to poison her." Nora's eyes moved from his face to the papers. "May I?" she asked Linda. "Of course," Linda said, sliding the top document toward her. Nora scanned the first page. I watched the color drain from her face in increments. "Julian," she read aloud. "It says here you opened joint accounts without disclosing existing debt, that you borrowed against her credit, that you promised to catch up once a promotion came through, that never did." He shrugged, a tiny, helpless gesture. "We were young," he said. "I made mistakes. I've learned from them. Everyone has history. Your mother is trying to weaponize mine because she doesn't trust anyone who wasn't handpicked by her." "That's enough," I said, more sharply than I'd intended. Nora looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but there was anger there too, familiar and sharp. "And you," she said. "You went behind my back. You hired someone to dig into my fiancé. Do you have any idea how violating that feels?" "Yes," I said, "because I did it anyway." I took a breath. "I did it because I heard the way he talked about you when you weren't in the room," I said. "I did it because he talked about my properties like they were already his. I did it because he said, 'I'm not leaving a marriage empty-handed twice.' And I needed to know what twice meant before you signed something you couldn't walk away from without bleeding." Julian's parents looked at him then, not at me, not at Nora. At him. "Is that true?" his father asked quietly. Did you say that? Julian looked cornered for the first time since I'd met him. The polish slipped, just a little. I was venting, he said. Your mom probably misheard. She's been against this from the beginning. Stop talking about me like I'm not here, I said. I'm against anyone entering my daughter's life with a pattern of using marriage as a financial plan. This isn't about you being poor once, Julian. Desmond and I started with nothing. This is about you hiding a whole marriage and a court case because you decided you deserved access to what other people built. The room went very quiet. Nora put the papers down. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse. How many credit cards do you have right now? She asked him. In your name only. He hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw something in her shift. Something that had been wobbling for weeks finally tip. I need air, she said, standing up so quickly the hem of her dress brushed the table. I need a minute. She walked out without looking back. Julian moved as if to follow her. Linda stepped slightly into his path. I'd give her that minute, she said. If you ever want her to believe anything you say again, he glared at me. If looks could strip paint off concrete, the walls of my storage facility would have been bare. You've ruined this, he said, all because you can't stand not controlling everything. No, I said, feeling something in my spine finally straighten all the way. If this is ruined, it's because you thought you could repeat the same story in a different state, and no one would ever bother to read the first chapter. He left then, the door swinging shut behind him hard enough to rattle the frame. His parents stayed seated for a long moment. His mother had one hand over her mouth. His father was staring at the annulment decree like it was in a language he almost recognized. I'm so sorry, his mother said finally. We knew about the marriage. We didn't know about this. She tapped the word fraud without quite touching it. I believe you, I said. And I'm sorry you had to find out this way too. Linda closed the folder. This is where the lawyers step back, she said gently. The rest of this is between parents and children. She was right. I stepped out into the hotel corridor to look for my daughter. I found Nora on the carpeted stairs between the ballroom level and the lobby, halfway down, sitting on a step with her back against the wall. She had taken off her heels. They sat neatly side by side 2 steps below her, like they'd simply walked themselves out of the room and given up. For a moment I just stood there, watching my child breathe, in and out, shoulders rising and falling with the kind of control that means the dam is barely holding. Is this where the mother of the bride is supposed to give a big speech about how it's all for the best? She asked, without looking up. No, I said, sitting a step below her so we weren't quite face to face. This is where your mother sits down and shuts up, until you tell her which part you want her for. She let out a strangled little laugh. That's new. I've been practicing, I said. We sat there for a minute in silence. The muffled sound of clinking china and confused chatter drifted down the hall. Somewhere, a waiter laughed at a joke he probably didn't find funny. You hired a private investigator, she said finally. On my fiancé. Yes, I said. Do you know how crazy that sounds? She asked. Yes, I said again. Do you know how crazy it feels to sit in your car and listen to your future son-in-law talk about not leaving a marriage empty-handed twice? She flinched, just a little. He said it didn't mean anything. The marriage, that it was a mistake. People say a lot of things when they're standing where he's standing, I said. The court records don't usually care how they felt about it. She scrubbed at her face with the heels of her hands, careful not to smear her makeup too much. The architect's instinct, probably. Never ruin what you can still repair. You went behind my back, she said. Again, Levi all over. I did, I said. Except this time I didn't tell you who to love. I went to a stranger and asked for paper, and I waited until I had it before I opened my mouth. That's worse, she said, but there was no heat in it, more like she was trying on the words to see if they still fit. I don't know if it is, I said quietly. I know that if I'd come to you with nothing but a feeling, you would have been right not to believe me. She stared down at her bare feet. He kept saying you were trying to control things, she said, that you couldn't stand the idea of me making my own choices. That you'd never really approved of him, and you were just waiting for an excuse. Some of that is true, I said. I haven't entirely approved of him. I have spent plenty of nights waiting for an excuse not to like him. That's on me. But he didn't get to use that to hide a whole other life. She leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. I don't even know what I'm more angry about, she said. That you looked. or that you found something. You can be angry about both, I said. I'm big enough to hold it. So is he. We sat there long enough for my knees to start complaining about the stairs. Eventually, she opened her eyes and looked at me. Is this why you told me that weird Thursday might be complicated thing? She asked. Yes, I said. I didn't know exactly how it would go. I just knew I didn't want you blindsided in a room full of strangers. She let out a breath that sounded like it hurt. Newsflash, she said. Still blindsided. I know, I said. Her voice got very small then, in a way I hadn't heard since she was little. Was any of it real? She asked. Do you think he ever actually wanted me? Or was it always about this? She gestured vaguely toward the ceiling, which I understood to mean the whole edifice, properties, trust funds, the invisible dollar signs hovering over our heads. I don't know, I said. Maybe he loved you and also loved the idea of never worrying about money again. Those things aren't mutually exclusive for some people. That's what makes them dangerous. She nodded slowly, as if that answer, horrible as it was, made more sense than any cleaner one could have. What do I do now? She asked. I wanted fiercely to hand her a plan. Cancel the venue, call the guests, send back the gifts, lawyer up. Instead, I swallowed the part of me that likes checklists and said, the only decision you have to make tonight is whether you want to see him again before you sleep. She thought about that. If I don't, is that it? She asked. No, I said. Nothing that big ends in one night. But if you talk to him now, he'll be in spin mode. He's had practice. You've just had your reality shifted sideways. That's not a fair fight. You think he's that calculated? She asked. I think, I said carefully, that a person who has already been in a courtroom once over money and marriage gets very good at telling their version first. She was quiet for a long time. I don't want to see him, she said finally. Not tonight. Then you won't, I said. If he tries to get past me, I'll tell him the bride has left the building. She huffed out a sound that was almost a laugh. Can we go home? She asked. I don't want to go back in there. We can go wherever you want, I said. Your apartment, mine, a motel off the highway. Wherever hurts least. She picked up her shoes and stood a little unsteady. Yours, she said. It smells like Dad. The ache that sentence caused surprised me with its freshness. Okay, I said. Mine. We walked back toward the lounge. Linda was just coming out as we approached. She took one look at Nora's face and stepped aside. I'll handle the room, she murmured. Tell them the bride isn't feeling well. The dinner is over. The wedding is on hold. Thank you, I said. Call me tomorrow, she replied. Preferably after coffee. We left through the service entrance, the way staff go when they don't want to cross the lobby. It felt appropriate. Brides go through the front doors. Women who've just stepped away from a disaster use the back. In the car, Nora stared straight ahead. At what point, she asked quietly, were you going to tell me if I hadn't asked you to come to the tasting? I don't know, I said. Before you signed a license, after I figured out how to say fraud without sounding like I was trying to win an argument. Do you think you did the right thing? She asked. I thought about Emma in Arizona, typing and retyping that caption about husbands who marry balance sheets. I thought about Desmond, who'd spent his life making sure I would never have to ask a man's permission to spend my own money.
Yes,
I said. I think I did the right thing very late, and in a way that hurt you. Both of those things can be true. She nodded. I'm so tired, she said. I know, I said. Sleep first, rage later, logistics after that. We're going to have to call everyone, she said. Cancel the venue, the vendors, the hotel. We'll do it together, I said. You don't have to explain anything you're not ready to. The wedding is off is a complete sentence. She leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. The streetlights slid over her face in bands of golden shadow all the way home. That night, she slept in the bed she'd grown up in a room that looked nothing like it had when she was 15. I sat in Desmond's old armchair in the hallway, the folder on my lap, and listened to my daughter's breathing through a cracked door the way I had the week she had pneumonia as a child. Somewhere across town, a man who thought he could marry into stability twice had just discovered that concrete and paper are only as useful as the people who own them. And for the first time since Desmond died, I felt like I had used what he left me for something more important than a repair bill. Weddings, when they go well, create 1,000 little tasks in their wake: thank you notes, dry cleaning, sorting photos. When they detonate, the to-do list looks different. We started with the venue. The next morning, Nora sat at my kitchen table in an oversized sweatshirt and yesterday's mascara, a mug of coffee cooling in front of her. I dialed the Madison Hotel, put it on speaker, and let the coordinator go through her sympathetic script. "We're so sorry to hear this," she said. "Given how close we are to the date, some deposits are non-refundable. We understand," Nora said, voice flat. "Please just cancel everything. Rooms, catering, the ceremony space. If there are fees, email the breakdown. I'll deal with it." The "we" in that sentence made something warm and painful move behind my ribs. "What about the guests?" I asked after we hung up. "I'll email my side," she said. "You can do yours?" "Of course," I said. She stared at her coffee. "What do I say?" she asked. Surprise, I almost married a con artist? Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding will not be taking place, I suggested. People who need more will ask. You can decide who gets the details. She nodded. Copy-paste it is. Over the next 2 days, the house filled with the fallout of love interrupted. Dresses arrived in garment bags that would never see an aisle. Gifts turned up on the porch, some with cards we didn't open. Julian's mother called twice, left voicemails that sounded almost as tired as we felt. "I don't know what to say," she said in one. "I'm so sorry. For all of you. Please tell Nora I understand if she never wants to see us again. I hope someday she knows not everyone who raised him agrees with what he's done." Nora didn't return the calls. Not then. She did, however, call Marta. "I just wanted to say thank you," I heard her say from the other room, "for doing your job." "Thank your mother," Marta replied, her voice faint through the receiver. Most people ignore their gut until after the honeymoon. A week later, Nora met with Linda without me. "I need to know what I'm exposed to," she said, financially. They went over joint expenses, deposits, credit cards. The damage was mostly emotional and logistical, not monetary. Julian had insisted on keeping their finances largely separate for now, a decision that had infuriated Nora at the time and now felt like an accidental grace. "You'll eat some non-refundable deposits," Linda said. "It will hurt. It will not ruin you." That's the difference between this and what happened in Arizona. For a while, my relationship with my daughter hovered in a strange limbo. Some days she was grateful, almost effusively so, texting me articles about annulment cases, dropping by my office with lunch and a hug that lasted a beat too long. Other days, she was brittle and short, snapping at small things and then apologizing immediately. "I know you saved me from something," she said once, standing in my kitchen with a glass of water. "I'm just not sure yet if I was ready to be saved." "That's fair," I said. I wasn't ready to be the one to do it. Time did what it always does. It moved. Spring bled into summer. The save-the-date magnets came off people's fridges. The venue booked other couples. The world, which had briefly narrowed to the size of a dining room at the Madison Hotel, widened again. 3 months after the non-wedding, Nora knocked on my door on a Sunday afternoon with a notebook in her hand. "I want you to show me everything," she said. "Define everything," I said, wary out of habit. "The properties," she said, "the LLCs, the trust documents, Dad's old spreadsheets. All of it. I don't want to be safe by accident anymore." We spread papers across the dining table, the way we had spread wedding plans there months earlier. There was something almost sacramental about it, this handing over of knowledge. I showed her cash flow statements and rent rolls. She asked about loan maturities, about reserve accounts for capital expenditures, about zoning risks. Somewhere between the strip mall on Claymore and the storage units by the interstate, I realized I was no longer giving her a tour of a thing I controlled. I was inducting a partner. "Why didn't you teach me this earlier?" she asked, not accusatory, just curious. "Because I thought I was protecting you," I said, "from expectations, from people like Julian, from becoming the kind of person who sees every relationship in terms of risk and return. How's that working out for you?" she asked, with a wry half-smile. "Mixed results," I admitted. She flipped through Desmond's old notebook, yellowed pages full of neat block printing and little doodles of storefronts. "Dad would have done the background check too, wouldn't he?" she asked. "He would have done it earlier," I said. "And then made friends with the investigator." She laughed properly this time. "I'm not ready to date again," she said. "God, not for a long time. But when I do, I think I want to be the kind of person who can sit across from someone and know that if they walk away, I'll still have myself. And these ugly strip malls. Hey, I said, rude, those ugly strip malls paid for your braces? And the investigator, she said. Don't forget the investigator, I said. We fell into a new ritual after that. Once a week, usually on Thursdays, Nora would come over for dinner, and then we'd spend an hour going over one aspect of the estate plan. Beneficiary designations, insurance policies, what happens to a storage unit when a tenant dies. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for her at 34, but it was real, and it was ours. One evening in late summer, as we sat on the back porch watching the sun drip down behind the nearest strip center, she said, I've been thinking about Emma. Emma? I asked. The woman in Arizona? She said. The one who had to go to court just to make the state acknowledge what had been done to her. Ah, I said. Emma. I looked her up. Nora said. Don't worry, I didn't reach out. I wanted to see her face, to remind myself that this isn't just a story about me and my almost wedding. It's a pattern he created, and she was the first draft. We sat with that for a moment. Do you ever feel guilty? She asked. That I got the warning and she got the lesson the hard way? All the time, I said. And then I remember that guilt doesn't help her. The only thing that might help anyone else like her is making sure men like him don't keep getting away with hiding the past. Do you think he'll try this again? She asked. I hope not, I said. I also hope gravity stops working one day so my knees don't hurt. Hope is not a plan. What is the plan? She asked. The plan, I said, is for you to trust your gut faster next time, and for me to trust that you will. She nodded. Do you trust me? I asked, before I could lose my nerve. She took a long time to answer. I trust that you're on my side, she said finally. Even when your methods make me want to scream, I trust that you're capable of being wrong. And I trust, she hesitated. I trust that if my gut and yours disagree, we'll at least put both on the table before we let anyone else write the ending. It wasn't the blanket absolution some people get in tidy stories. It was better. It was two grown women, both bruised, agreeing to stay in the room with each other's uncertainty. On the 1-year anniversary of what would have been her wedding, Nora took the day off work and came over with a stack of old photo albums. Do you want to be sad? I asked. I want to be accurate, she said. I think I've been using the wrong day as a mile marker. We went through photos of Desmond and me at 26 in our cheap suits in front of the first strip mall. Of Nora as a baby in a onesie that said boss's daughter. Of all the times we had been more than whatever pain was happening in the foreground. At some point, she found a candid shot of me at a tenant's holiday party years ago, standing by the coffee urn, talking to someone with my hands in motion. You look just like you did at the rehearsal dinner, she said softly. Tired? I asked. Stubborn, she said. Like you'd already decided to outlive whatever nonsense was in front of you. I took the photo from her and looked at my younger self. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, I said, it's not that you were almost stupid, it's that you were deeply human in a world where some people are very good at wearing costumes. Your gut knew. It just didn't have a name for what it was seeing yet. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Next time, she said, I'm going to listen when it whispers instead of waiting for it to scream. That, I said, is exactly what it's there for. People talk about happy endings like they're a location you arrive at and then live in forever, like a well-decorated hotel suite. I have come to think of them more like storage units. You fill them slowly, over years with things you might need again someday. Lessons, boundaries, documents, the sound of your daughter's laugh when she finally realizes a disaster she survived is just one chapter in a much longer book. If you're smart, you label the boxes. If you're very lucky, you learn to trust the part of you that knows when to open them. And if you're me, you keep a spare key in the back of your mind, ready for the next time someone smiles too widely when they talk about legacy wealth. If you've ever felt that same quiet tap on your ribs, the whisper you almost talked yourself out of, I'd like to know what you did with it. Did you listen? Or did you wait, like I almost did, for it to scream? Because love, I have learned, is not less real for being careful. And intuition is not an enemy to be overcome. It is simply the quiet, persistent sum of every red flag you've ever seen, tapping you on the ribs and saying, gently, look again.